Hi, this is Louise Legat from the Purpose Led School, and welcome to this week's short. What I want to talk about today is bold leadership and why it is needed at this time. And actually, it's not just needed, it's essential. Or another way of putting it is, I was talking to a leader recently who was looking at her areas of development in terms of really wanting to be that change agent in her organization. And how she named it was, this is about working on the courage to be exceptional. I've been working in the area of leadership development now for about 22 years. And leadership has been, for the most part of that, about how to learn to manage the status quo, to organize yourself, to delegate, to make the existing system work. And a lot of that, if we're really honest, has also been about fitting in to the existing boxes. You know, I see a lot of managers who are literally managing, right? And a lot of what they're doing is also playing the corporate politics and making sure they're pleasing their boss because then they get their good reviews. But, you know, a lot of it is about how to kind of not stick your neck too much above the parapet because you don't want the risk to be ultimately perceived as rocking the boat too much. You know, you want to be able, in terms of your own promotions, to be able to be perceived as someone that fits the system. And that's what it's always been like. And so a lot of leadership is more around that process of managing and sustaining what is already there rather than creating things that are fundamentally new. Now, I know that some of you will have been in the innovation field and it might have been, you know, the focus is different. But what I found is, yes, there has been some attempts and some progress in certain areas around leading differently. But a lot of it is, it's this weird dichotomy where we're doing different topics, but we're still kind of sustaining a lot the old ways of managing and ultimately that maintaining that existing process and structure. And why I want to talk about that today is when we want to be really focusing on building the new, which is what we're meant to be doing next in terms of the new economy, the new ways of doing things, and ultimately really facilitating progress, then managing and the skill set that is about managing the status quo is not going to be enough. Now, I know we're in a transition phase, so we still have to manage some of the existing pieces, but at the same time, we need to be advancing the new aspects. We need to be also making progress, which means that as leaders, we need to develop further than we have been up until now. And that is where this piece around bold leadership and the courage to be exceptional comes in that this is not anymore about being perfect in the old system or pleasing or appeasing and all those things that we've learned to do pretty well in order to keep that balance between, hey, I can bring a bit of change, but, you know, I've got to play the game ultimately. We need, if we really want to make the leaps that are needed now, we actually need to be much bolder. We need to break the mold. Because that is the only way that we're going to be able to make the leaps that we need to make and the advances we actually need to make. But it is a fundamental shift in terms of our positioning and our stand as a leader. In terms of where we get our sense of value. You know, before it was, hey, I'm doing well in the old system and I'm kind of pleasing the people around me. When you start to decide that you're going to become part of that crew that is actually building the world of the new and making progress, you need to go well beyond that. You need to be able to stand in, hey, you know, I want to have the conversations that nobody wants to have. You know, that's one of the big pieces. And of course, it's about learning to bring those in the right way. But we need to be much bolder in terms of the conversations that we bring, the new perspectives, the aspects of ourselves that we choose to express in our work and our leadership. Like, there comes a point where we have to really care. We have to bring back into our work what we really care about. And yes, what we're trying to do is this balancing act of ultimately still sustaining the world of business. And at the same time, we want to impact the things we care about. And right now, the way that we've created the world of business is actually a destructive force in terms of the things that we genuinely care about. And so there, we have to have the courage to bring back our hearts, our souls, and ultimately what makes us feel deeply alive, and be willing to talk about that. Interestingly, bold is not about force. Bold is about vulnerability. And in my experience, not a lot of us like that word. But it's in the acknowledgement of our vulnerability that we also realize why it's so important to have the courage to fundamentally change. And so boldness, ironically, in a lot of ways, it's about bringing people back to talk about really what matters and the consequences of us not acting. Not just because of the bottom line, but fathers to fathers. This means saying, what will happen to our children if we don't act? What will happen to our grandchildren if we don't act?